Tonight on Nation to Nation, Chief Commissioner Marion Buller on the delay in asking the feds for an extension.
We want to get it right the first time so that we're not going back to the government again.
Grand Council Chief Madhavi says Ontario First Nations aren't ready for legal marijuana.
No, obviously we've been trying to tell both levels of governments that this should have taken more time.
Next, Fine Day explains what the newly created National Reconciliation Council should do.
Playing that crucial role of a watchdog to making sure that in this post-apology era that we're in, that we're committed and we're sincere.
Welcome to Nation. Hello, I'm Todd Lamoran. The National Inquiry has had a rough first year. There's been tremendous staff turnover, demands for its commissioners to resign, and calls for a reset. But Prime Minister Justin Trudeau recently said he's a long way from scrapping or restarting it. Chief Commissioner Marion Buller continues to weather the turmoil and plans to push for more time and money to finish the job. And join me now is Chief Commissioner Marion Buller. Thank you for being on Nation to Nation.
Thank you for the invitation.
So I got to ask this, I got to get it out of the way. Do you or the other commissioners have any plans to step down and resign?
No. We are absolutely dedicated to the work that we're doing, the people that we're hearing from, and moving forward in a good way.
The Prime Minister just yesterday said he's a long way from scrapping or restarting the inquiry. How do you take that? Do you take that as a vote of confidence?
I take that as somebody who understands the work that we're doing and is informed about what we have accomplished, because we've heard from close to 600 people already. We've been to 8 different locations for hearings and communities. We've had 2 community events, an expert hearing. We delivered our interim report on time. I take that as informed comments.
He also said he's monitoring the situation. I don't have to tell you some of the criticisms that are out there, of course. And Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Bennett said she's concerned by the turnover, but wants to keep things at arm's length. I suppose, what do you think about the role the federal government is playing?
Well, I won't get into the legal nature of the relationship between the federal government and an inquiry and the independence that's required. I think that it's really important to know that this is a public inquiry. It's on a scale that has never been done before. We're facing challenges, quite honestly, and a lot of those challenges you don't know until you're in the middle of the work itself.
There was talk earlier, a few months ago, that the PMO's office was maybe too involved, especially when it came to how and when you spent the funding that you got.
Well, we're bound by all the same policies, rules, regulations, laws that government departments are for their spending. And I don't regret that, and I don't fight that, because we are responsible for the money that we do spend.
When we last talked about a month ago, you mentioned that you were going to make a formal request for an extension. Has that been made yet?
We're still in the process of drafting it, because our focus from September to December was on the public hearings in communities, hearing from families and survivors. That was our first and foremost task, because we need to honor that work. So we're working on our draft still. We are going to hear from advisors about what we've done in our draft, edits to be made, whether we've made mistakes, things to add, things of that nature, because we want to do this only once. We want to get it right the first time so that we're not going back to the government again.
It's kind of the same answer you gave me about a month ago. I guess, why is it such a slow process? Why haven't we, I suppose, when do you think you're going to ask that? Is there a specific date?
We're aiming for, I'm going to say, as soon as possible, because there's a lot of government machinery that has to work once we make that request. But it's really important to know that we have to do this in a thoughtful way. We want to talk to advisors about adding, subtracting, as I've said. We owe it to the families and survivors to do it right the first time, and we take that very seriously.
Can you tell me how long an extension or the dollar that you're looking for?
Yeah, we're looking at 2 years. approximately 2 years. So we would end in 2020, December 31st, I believe. For the actual resources that we're looking at, again, staff are doing that very carefully because we want to make sure we get it right.
If it's another 2 years, would you mean you're asking for double? It's 53 million now, so it'll be 106 million?
I'm speculating at this point, to be very honest with you, which isn't particularly helpful. I don't think it will be double, but whatever the number is, it'll be correct.
2020. I suppose, how would this extension help another 2 years and some more resources? What would you do with that extra time and money?
That extra time and extra resources gives us opportunities for more depth, to hear from more people, to hear from more experts, to spend more time in institutional hearings, to give more time to our research team to do the in-depth research that has to be done. Rather than skimming the surface, doing a very superficial job, we have the opportunity to go deeper. And that's going to affect the quality of our recommendations. They'll be better, they'll be more concrete, they'll be more usable.
I know one of the criticisms is that the inquiry, as you said, isn't digging that deep. Does that mean, I know some families would like to see cold cases reopened and have police re-examine their files? Is that what you're talking about?
Not that specifically, but we did address that concern in our interim report, and we did make a recommendation that there be a police task force to do exactly that. We don't have the resources, and it's not within our existing mandate to reopen cold cases. But we've heard from families all across Canada that that's what they want. They want answers. And that's why we made the recommendation that we did.
I suppose, how can you overcome the perception that the inquiry is dysfunctional? You know, there's all these turnovers. You know, Debbie Reid was just the latest. And you're not putting families first. That perception seems to be out there, especially with a segment of the families. How do you overcome that?
Just by continuing on doing the work that we want to do in the way that we want to do it. We have very dedicated, hardworking staff who are all across Canada who want this to be successful as well. So we're deeply committed to doing our work in a good way.
Why not at least pause the inquiry and I suppose take a step back and then maybe go forward, kind of like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission did?
With our current mandate, we don't have time to take a specific pause and relook. What we do regularly, almost daily, is we listen very carefully to the constructive, informed criticism that we have been receiving. We listen very carefully. So it's an ongoing adjustment that we're making to do our work better.
Of course, you had a big staff meeting in Toronto, I think about a week or so ago. Do you think you've re-energized yourselves through that and we can look forward to not so many turnovers?
Our staff meeting was wonderful. We were able to re-energize, to understand the challenges that we all face. And I think moving forward, our dedication is even deeper. I know that our staff all across Canada is very committed to doing this work, seeing it through, honoring the lives of the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and to honor the courage of survivors of violence as well. We're ready to move forward.
How soon do you think before you name another executive director?
That's a good question. We have our interim executive director, Calvin Wong, and we just need to get our work done. We have our hearing coming up next week in Yellowknife and about 3 weeks after that in Rankin Inlet. So we've got a pretty full menu ahead of us. And as I've said before, our first priority is families and survivors.
Okay, that's it. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
After the break, Union of Ontario Indians leader Patrick Madhavi joins me in studio to talk nuclear waste and cannabis. Welcome back. Union of Ontario Indians Grand Council Chief Patrick Madhavi was in Ottawa today. He spoke at a press conference opposing an effort by the Chalk River Nuclear Lab to get a 10-year license renewal, and participated in a march through the streets of Ottawa and a rally at City Hall. He's in our Ottawa studio to talk about that and a few other things. And joining me now is Grand Council Chief Madhavi. Thank you for and welcome to Nation to Nation.
Thank you, Todd.
Now, what kind of pressure do you think you can put on the Canadian Nuclear Regulatory Commission over this 10-year license renewal?
Well, I think the fact that we have a coalition between the Iroquois Caucus and the Anishinaabe communities, which represents a significant number of First Nations in this territory, and the territory that are proposing to either store nuclear waste or transport nuclear waste through the area. We have support as well from the Anishinaabe and Grand Council Treaty 3 and other First Nations across Ontario and Quebec. So it's a joint coalition between First Nations in Ontario and Quebec. But added to that, there's a couple of key things that I think I should mention. For our Iroquois Caucus and the Anishinaabe Nation, we are really following the lead of our youth. And I think that's significant. The youth are taking a lot of the initiatives to move this agenda forward. They're on social media, they're doing networking, and they're planning events and activities. In fact, not too long ago during the Canada 150 celebrations, you'll recall a group putting the teepee up on Parliament Hill. That was some of those young people that were involved with this activity. But we also have a real coalition of non-native people that have interests all around the Ottawa River and on both the Quebec and Ontario side. And I think that bodes well. And I think we're contacting even tribes in the States, because this is going to get moved around if they start to transport nuclear waste. So, we were successful, if you'll recall, a few years back when they tried to remove those generators out of the Bruce area up to Owen Sound by highway, and then through the water system of Lake Huron and the St. Clair River up to St. Lawrence. And the Iroquois and the Anishinaabe and the tribes in the States and friends we have from municipalities were able to stop that initiative. And where I come from, on the North Manitoulin area and the North Shore, twice now we've stopped them talking about putting an underground depository of nuclear waste in our territory. And so they tried a few years ago, they tried again recently, and they're not coming there now. So they're looking at somewhere else now. I hear they're talking about up towards Ignis, and maybe some of the Superior Treaty and Treaty 3 and NAN, will be very active on that file, and we'll support them, of course.
You mentioned earlier youth, so I want to turn my attention to the Education Act that the Anishinaabe just signed with the federal government. How was that different, that piece of legislation that you fully supported, than the Harper government-era Education Act that at the time Sean Attlee, who was National Chief, supported? Well,
that First Nations Control of Indian Education Act that the Harper government, who I may say wasted space on Mother Earth for 10 years here in this country, they were putting forth another control mechanism of the minister. The total control was still with the minister. Now, our Anishinaabe education system is under our control. The 23 First Nations that signed this historic agreement, they have representation we have a central Kinnamazun Education Authority. It's like the major school board. But every First Nation has representation that directs what happens in terms of the curriculum, the history, the language, visits by elders. Anything that they direct and desire, they fashion and shape what this education system will be. And and our educators are very sharp, and the people we have working, from the academic field are going to ensure the success of our children.
Let's talk about another piece of legislation that's coming up. It's quite controversial, especially amongst First Nations, not only here in Ontario but across Canada, and that's the pending legality of cannabis. You say you got a meeting coming up in March. Yes. You probably have had preliminary meetings. I suppose, what's the consensus out there about this?
Yeah, we're going through a series of regional meetings right now, culminating in a major meeting in March, where we're bringing in some experts in that. There's a number of thoughts. I mean, people are looking at all of the aspects of this. I mean, obviously there's the medical marijuana side, there's the growing of it for the medical marijuana side, and of course there's the worrisome side of it is the recreational cannabis. And we're concerned as well that, obviously, what is in the product itself, the safety of our people, that are ingesting, whether it's byproducts of this or smoking it, and then the safety on a job site, for example. I mean, you have to be alert. You're operating, especially you operate heavy equipment, or you're operating anything that could cause personal or injure someone else. So there's lots of facets to this. I think it's going to be a pretty robust discussion in March. We've got people on all sides of the equation. I think prevalent, though, is the concern about the safety of our children, the safety of our people in our communities has been the overriding sentiment I've been hearing at the meetings.
Very quickly, do you think First Nations in Ontario, especially the ones you represent, are ready for this in July?
No, obviously we've been trying to tell both levels of governments that this should have taken more time. The policing of this, and the security of our communities, already we're seeing, organized crime trying to come around, and we're seeing people saying, it's my right to do whatever the hell I want. I don't need to talk to the chief and council. This is a collective right of our communities. The safety of our people and the safety of our children is paramount here. That surely overrides anyone's individual rights.
Well, thank you. Anytime you want to drop by and talk to me, feel free to do so.
I'll do that, Todd. Thank you.
Thank you. Another break, and the topic is the National Reconciliation Council. We asked Max Finday about the Council's mandate. Welcome back to Nation to Nation. Just over a month ago, the federal government announced the creation of a National Council for Reconciliation, based on numbers 53 to 56 in the TRC's calls to action. It was made by Crown Indigenous Relations Minister Carolyn Bennett and Willie Littlechild.
Thank you very much. The Council, I think, has a very important role to play going forward, not only for follow-up, but indeed to answer the question about how do we engage the rest of Canada on reconciliation.
But what exactly is the Reconciliation Commission supposed to do? Bennett also announced a 6-member interim board at the same time last month. One of those on it is Max Finday. He's co-executive director of Canadian Roots Exchange, an organization that fosters reconciliation between Indigenous and non-Indigenous youth. He joins me now. Welcome to the show, Mr. Finday.
Hey, Neil Kisagawa, Todd. It's great to be with you this morning.
Now, what exactly is this interim board, which I heard is going to be meeting soon, supposed to do?
The National Council is supposed to develop a bit of an action plan. It's supposed to monitor and evaluate and report to all of Parliament on how the government is making advances in reconciliation, is repairing the relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people across this country. What we're tasked with as the interim council is making sure that it's established right, setting up the terms of reference and a bit of scope of the work, and coming together, listening to Indigenous folks and non-Indigenous folks about what's the possibility of this council, and of course, drawing on the strong experience of my fellow appointees.
Now, TRC Call to Action number 55 has a list of things to report progress on, like the overrepresentation of Indigenous people in prisons or closing the gap on health or education. Now, currently, other agencies already make reports on those particular issues. So how would the council be different?
Yeah, I think, I don't have all the answers. We have to figure that out as a council. I think what could be helpful to our communities, to Canada as a whole, is putting all of that data together. We know there's strong community organizations who have been doing this work for generations, and I'm certainly the first to show my appreciation to them. I think it could be helpful to give a clear picture in sort of all efforts and all issues to make sure that we know exactly what's going on in health and education, language revitalization, and we're able to compile that data so that legislators, that our parliament, our government, has a clear picture of where the needs are and where the progress is occurring as well.
Of course, you represent a youth voice. Is the issue of reconciliation on the radar of most Indigenous youth, do you think?
I'm a young guy. I'm 26 years old. Very honored to be doing the work that I'm doing, not only on this council, but as well at Canadian Roots Exchange. I have the good fortune of hearing from young people, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, about their passions, and that certainly includes reconciliation. You know, as I travel around the country, I hear about young Indigenous people talking about how important nation building is for them, and how important it is to retain their culture, their languages, their ceremonies, how proud they are of being the first generation to attend post-secondary, get that high school diploma. I think that's a crucial part and a crucial celebration that we have to mark. As well, I hear from non-Indigenous people, youth, who talk about their responsibility that they feel to make sure that reconciliation actually happens, that there's progress made, that they can be proud of Canada for the idea that it often gets as the great human rights defender on the international stage. You know, there was a report released about a year ago from the Environics Institute that showed that 79% of young non-Indigenous people aged 18 to 32 believe that meaningful reconciliation can occur in their lifetime. Now, that's higher than any other demographic in the country. So if you ask me whether young people are excited and passionate, believe that reconciliation is a priority for this country, I think the answer is a resounding yes.
Of course, you talked about nation building earlier on. Sometimes when Indigenous people go about nation building, it comes into conflict with the nation of Canada. Doesn't sometimes reconciliation go out the window when these conflicts happen?
So, you know, of course there are folks who are frustrated with the current conversations or context that reconciliation is presented in. Sometimes it's very inaccessible for Indigenous people. That's something that mustn't be allowed to happen, mustn't be allowed to occur. True reconciliation is bringing together, our voices in universities, bringing together our voices who are in community, who are the youth worker, who are the band manager, the chief and council, who are the water protectors, who are running the community gardens in their community or in downtown Vancouver, whatever it may be. You know, certainly, I think it makes sense, and it's very fair that people are a little suspicious about reconciliation, and we as a country, we have to show, we as a council and the government must ensure that we don't drop the ball. And I think that's a part of the work of the National Council on Reconciliation, is playing that crucial role of a watchdog to making sure that in this post-apology era that we're in, that we're committed and we're sincere with our efforts to advance reconciliation, make Indigenous peoples to allow Indigenous peoples to have the same quality of life as any other Canadian.
On that note, Mr. Fine-Day, I want to thank you for talking to me. Thank you.
Hey, really appreciate the opportunity.
And if you missed any part of tonight's show, you can check out our podcasts. Go to aptnnews.ca/podcasts. I'm Todd Lamoran. Have a great evening.